Good morning again, everybody. My name is Peter Haines with CCL Academy, and we're going to talk this morning about delivering effective regulatory training for the board. I sit on a board of a bank, a small bank, so I've been trained, and I have trained boards in my capacity as a consultant and trainer, and I've also sat in on board training when I was a compliance officer. So I guess I've been able to see it from all angles. I've seen very effective board training, and I've seen very ineffective board training. So the reason for today's session is really to set out how I can do it effectively and to talk about some of the pitfalls. If you do have any questions, there is a Q&A panel there, which we might be able to see as we go through. We should be able to see, but I'm going to be concentrating very much on the slides and the delivery. We also have chat, but do use the Q&A facility if you have any questions as we go through. What I will do is I will, even though this is scheduled for 10:30 till 11, I will stay around after 11 to have a chat with anybody who wants to talk about board training, about experiences they've had, any questions you might have, particularly if you want to ask any questions with fewer people around. Feel free to join me for a few minutes after our schedule close at 11. We'll keep the call open. So what we'll talk about is why it's important, that some of the challenges, individual versus collective training of directors, and then talk about maybe a couple of the areas that we really do need to train on. So just a quick focus on two areas, AML and conduct and culture, two very, very hot topics, of course, as you'll know, with the regulators right now. So why is it important? Well, of course, board members might think they're exempt. I am one, and I have a lot of colleagues and previous colleagues who are board members who've said, do we really need all of this training? You know, we've been in the industry for 25, 30 years. Why do we need training? Well, of course, they do need to be kept up to date, even if they think they are up to date. We need to make sure that they are up to date with the latest regulatory developments, latest regulatory expectations, and the technicalities of the products and the markets. So, and directors often don't actually want to say, do you know what, I'm not that good at this particular subject, I need training. How often does one hear that from directors? I was in a position about 6 years ago where I had to sign off as a non-executive director on any loan made for over $20 million. And I said to myself, look, I'm not credit trained. So the credit proposals were good, but I'm not credit trained. So I need some training. So I did a week's credit training to cover the gaps in my knowledge, which was really useful. But how often do you hear directors actually doing that? So there's a commercial imperative to ensure that one remains up to date. There is, of course, a regulatory imperative. As a director, you are likely, not necessarily going to be, but likely to be a senior management function, particularly if you chair one of the relevant committees. But even if you're not, you need to. But if you are an SMF, of course, fitness and propriety covers competence and capability. So you need to be able to demonstrate that you are competent to perform your role. And of course, when regulators come in during thematic reviews, they may well interview board members. So everybody needs to be up to date. It can, of course, be like herding cats, getting the board into one place at the same time. It can be a bit of a nightmare. These things get rescheduled, scheduled, postponed, cancelled all of the time. But if you can get your chair, the chair of the board, to understand that this is important, that the training is important, and of course, you can try to get the training on the same day as, for example, a board meeting, then that is really essential. So getting their attention, but if you do get it on the same day as the board meeting, try to get in before the board meeting and not afterwards. If you've got a 3, 4, even 5 hour board meeting, then trying to get the director's attention after that to a training session on data protection it's a real struggle, a real struggle. So do be aware of fatigue and try to persuade the chair, the company secretary, whoever, that it's good to get in there first while they're fresh. But when they are focused, you get some of the best discussions you get anywhere in any training session. The quality of the discussion, the quality of questions is great. I've had many sessions where actually I've had people, different board directors, questioning each other's assumptions and questioning their own assumptions. One session, we were overrunning terribly because they just wouldn't stop talking. And I looked over the chair and suggested to my watch, and the chair just went, no, let it go, doesn't matter if we overrun. And it was great. And at the end of it, one of the directors came up and said, that was really good training session. Thank you so much. And I said, you did all the talking. It was good because you led the discussion and really questioned yourself, which is what it should be about. So the quality of the questions that comes up will be really, really high, but also they can make swift decisions. They're comfortable enough to say, okay, this is an issue. We haven't thought about this before. This is what we ought to do. Let's do it. And you don't often get that in training sessions. So there are some real advantages of getting the board when they're fresh and focused. Of course, there may be instances where it's a good idea to do individual one-to-one training. So for people new to the regulatory environment, why not give them a good solid induction? And people new not just to the regulatory environment, but to new to the region. I did a training session for a CEO who'd been CEO in Asia, the Asia region for a bank, and he came over to the UK to be CEO for Europe. So he understood what it was like to be regulated, but he didn't know the UK regime. And it's very difficult to learn the differences within board meetings and within a general induction. So one-to-one is useful there. Also, internal promotions to senior management level. If somebody comes up from a COO to a CEO or a CFO to a CEO or whatever, or somebody in the finance department gets promoted to be the CFO. So suddenly they have, for example, a senior management function next to their name. That's where individual training can be effective. Also, if you have a thematic review and if you have interviews from the FCA or the PRA of key individuals of senior management, it's a really good thing to do, to give them a mock interview in advance of those sessions. And what we tend to find is that when we do mock interviews, we find real issues with content where the regulator asks for information, they get given that information, but the person to be interviewed doesn't get the time or find the time to read the stuff that's actually gone to the regulator. So the regulator is straight away at an advantage. They've got copies of minutes of meetings, copies of documents that the interviewee will be aware of, but might not have focused on. The other thing is style and brevity. Anyone who knows me well might think it's a bit rich, me talking about brevity in conversation. However, the style and the brevity of a mock interview are really important. And openness, there's a very fine line between honesty and openness. I always think honesty is, of course, non-negotiable. Openness is a slightly different matter. So you don't want to open the firm up to too much without actually being prepared for it, which is why a mock interview is a very useful thing to do. And preparation, people are more prepared if you give them a mock interview than if they haven't had one. And the body language is really important. This is a difficult one to do over Zoom, but sometimes I have people who fold their arms over during an interview, and then they fold them out so tightly that they can scarcely breathe at the end of it, which just shows, what does it show? It shows a lack of security in one's answers. Also, complete lack of eye contact with the questioner, which tells them, and the regulators are all trained in interview techniques and what they see. So these are all useful reasons for one-to-one individual training and connection between the trainer and the interviewee. So what should we be training on? AML is a very good example. So why not train them on recap on what anti-money laundering actually means, what money laundering is, what terrorist financing is. Train them on what the business risk assessment means. What does customer risk assessment, what does CDD stroke KYC actually mean? And what should their expectations be as directors of suspicious transaction reporting? And how do they lead, generate, preserve an appropriate culture for fighting financial crime? And this is a slide that I often give to boards when I will talk to them about their responsibilities for AML and the regulatory expectations. So to review and challenge the business risk assessment or the financial crime risk assessment if it's broader than just AML. Make sure that there are proper procedures, policies and procedures to mitigate those risks. Make sure that we've got the right CDD, stroke KYC, whatever your preferred acronym, policies, procedures appropriate to the risk of the business. And of course, appoint the right person as an MLRO. Make sure everybody knows they have a responsibility to prevent and detect money laundering and terrorist financing, and to sponsor, I would say this, a robust risk-based training program for its staff on financial crime. I would say this because I do training. However, I would say this also because this is really the defense of the board and the directors. Good CDD program, good understanding of risk, good CDD stroke KYC, and make sure everybody knows what the responsibility is, because then you've ticked that box. We don't have failure to prevent on AML. We have failure to prevent on anti-bribery and corruption and on tax evasion. At some stage, I think we will have failure to prevent on AML. So these are the boxes to be ticked by boards to make sure that the board itself, individual directors, and most importantly, the company shouldn't be criticized by the regulators if somebody steps out of line. So here is our overall program. So again, remind them on the various steps of the program. It's really key, and I'll leave this with you in the interest of time. But the business risk assessment, we've all seen this, maybe not in the form of this diagram. The four key pillars, as I call them, of AML risk: products and services, customers and markets, geography, and distribution channel. I often hear distribution channel being referred to as interface, which I actually think is a better way of describing it, because distribution implies effectively the distribution of retail products, whereas interface talks about the way that you interact with your customers. So those are the four key pillars, plus transactions, technology, no weaknesses, etc., all fitting into the business risk assessment. And this is something that the board has to be seen to be reviewing and challenging, preferably on at least an annual basis, or of course, whenever any material changes exist to the business. So best practice, it'll be approved by the board and challenged. And of course, the whole CDD program, can the board be comfortable that we've got the right CDD KYC processes in place, that people understand them, that they are properly leveraging the risk-based approach, and that customers are getting the right risk classification, low, medium, high, whatever it is, particularly with customers with PEPs or embedded PEPs as shareholders or directors, advisors, that sort of thing. Have we got the right processes? And of course, do people understand to whom they should be reporting any suspicious transactions? Do all employees understand who their MLRO is? And what information does the board get to assure itself that a sensible number of internal SARs or STRs, again, depending on your preferred acronym, are the right level of SARs being produced and are the right level of SARs being forwarded on to the NCA? And what MI does the board actually get to satisfy itself of that? So that's all on AML, all key things to discuss with the board. Let's move quickly on to conduct and culture. And again, the sort of things that we should be talking to the board are, what are the expectations, the regulatory expectations regarding conduct and culture? How do we instill a positive culture? And how do we demonstrate cultural leadership from the board and senior management down? So how should the board conduct itself to retain a positive culture? And you can explain to the board about the interaction, the links between culture, governance, and conduct. Often you see all three words in the same sentence, and certainly culture and conduct, you definitely do. And the good thing is that the FCA has done a decent amount of work and a decent amount of decent work on culture in financial services. Probably the best paper they put out was a discussion paper 1802. So it's 3 years ago now, pretty much, that they published this. And these are good statements that you can make to the board to talk about culture. And of course, it's no one size fits all, but it's the habitual behaviors and mindsets that characterize an organization. And you can challenge the board. You can say to the board, have you made it clear what the culture of the firm is? And often, instead of saying culture, one talks about the values of the firm. Value, what are the values of the firm? What is the vision of the firm? And does the vision of the firm actually represent properly those values? Do those values exist? Are those values properly embedded? How do you as a board assure yourself that those values are properly embedded? So values generally, conduct values, TCF outcomes, all of this stuff is really important. So you can give good quotations from good people. Alison Cottrell from the British Standards, the Banking Standards Board rather, talked about what this actually means in financial services companies. And so what she said was these norms will help determine what is considered admirable, tolerable, or shameful within a group. So why not ask that question of the board? You've hopefully espoused values as a board, but who actually follows through with that? Who determines what is admirable, tolerable, or shameful? Is it the board? Is it the CEO? Is it the management team? And is it done effectively? And what we've seen, again, it's almost 3 years ago, but this is good work from the FCA. When they talked about instilling a positive culture, what they said was what we saw in conduct risk frameworks, remember the real link between conduct risk and culture, is highly visible board and CEO sponsorship, engagement and participation, and senior executive leadership. They didn't want to see conduct risk and cultural change programs being run just by compliance officers. Compliance officers are nature's heroes and heroines. You hear me say that often, I'm sure, if you've heard me speak. But we can't do everything. And I say we, I haven't actually been a compliance officer for about 3 years, but even so, I still count myself as one. We can't do everything. And we do need senior leadership involved in driving projects, designing projects, and they will have a greater impact because frankly, they are the people that pay everybody else in the firm. We don't. So hopefully they'll listen to compliance people, but they'll listen to senior leadership in a far more meaningful way. So they don't want this all to be led by support control functions. And they see it as being most effective when you have fully integrated training programs, performance management, and remuneration with conduct and culture. So values are all very well, but if you are remunerating people, incentivizing them to act in the wrong way, then it'll have potentially a reverse effect. So it has to be all encompassing and all joined up. So these are good questions to challenge the board. Does the board demonstrate the right culture? Does the board show leadership in culture and values? How visible and accessible are board members and senior management on points of value and culture? And just to demonstrate that this link between governance, culture, and conduct, these are questions that I will ask of board members when I'm conducting a board evaluation. So it's a real link here between culture and governance. And these are good questions to ask, good questions to challenge the board with, and to start the board discussion. So people say culture is contagious. It's more likely to be contagious if, of course, it comes from the top. And this is a slide I often use with boards when I talk about, and senior management, when I talk about culture. And the FCA has said that tone from the top is crucial, and SMFs must, senior management functions must lead by example, because conduct rules are a critical foundation for firms' culture. So again, this clear link between culture and conduct. So the starting point often with the FCA is the conduct rules. So not just the 5 conduct rules that apply to everybody, but also the 4 conduct rules that apply to senior management function holders. And it isn't, again, just the responsibility of HR and compliance. Of course, HR and compliance play an important role, but everybody's responsible, especially senior management. And this is something the FCA has said. I will say this to boards: you have responsibility for conduct in your firm. If you have responsibility for that conduct, then you're responsible for influencing your staff conduct, and staff rely on you to make sure that they know what good looks like. And what the FCA has said in their speeches and in their papers is, senior management, get out there and talk about conduct. So talk about conduct, make sure you know what good conduct looks like. Make sure you understand if there are cases of misconduct. Make sure these are escalated and reported, because we all know there's a reporting obligation, but not just because there's a reporting obligation, so that the proper remedial action can take place. So if I'm talking to the CEO, I will say to the CEO, make sure that when you next have your town hall, that you will talk to all staff, not just about how much money you're making, all of the new products and great, all the good stuff, but also talk about what this means to me as CEO, culture, doing the right thing. I had one CEO who invited me to his town hall, and he was talking about culture, compliance, conduct, almost every other sentence. And he bounced up to me afterwards and said, "So how was that good? And how was that? Was it really good?" I didn't really want to say, "Look, actually tone it down," because I know he did tone it down the next one. But it was great to see that sort of leadership. But actually, you can do this. Get your senior management involved in training. Get them. That one of the best induction training sessions I've ever seen was one where you got a member of the senior management team turn up to people on their first day and say, "By the way, I'm one of the guys in charge here, and this is why this is important to me." We talk about doing the right thing. You've got to do the right thing, not just in front of me and my colleagues. You've got to do all of the right thing when you're talking to clients, when you're settling clients' transactions, in every aspect of your work with the firm. Doing the right thing, embodying and representing our values is really important. And the person who's spoken before was somebody from HR. The person who spoke afterwards was somebody from compliance. We didn't have the same level of focus from the people in the audience. When that senior leader was talking, you could have heard a pin drop. So that cultural leadership is really important. So I think what I would say in conclusion, and hopefully this gives us a little time for questions, is we know what the regulators see as the responsibilities of the board. It is absolutely significant. So boards need to be aware of this. They need to be aware of their need for cultural leadership. And leadership in terms of AML, leadership in terms of all of these absolute regulatory priorities. So what's our biggest challenge? Persuading boards to have the training, first of all. When they actually do have it, they usually make it really, really constructive because they have the self-confidence to say what they believe. They don't hold back. They ask really good questions and they will challenge themselves and challenge each other. So getting them together at the same time is always a challenge. I had one this week, which had been postponed, and also the time then changed, I think 3 times in all, which was a bit of a nightmare for the trainer, but that's how boards operate. So getting them together at the same time, remember, try to get them before the main board meeting if it's on the same day, if you possibly can. Of course, we can help you. Of course, we can train your board. We can do mock interviews of staff and senior staff before the regulators come in. But you can do it yourself as well. So, but do contact us if you need any support or assistance.